Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chuchu as a Ranker. On this episode, we're going to be continuing our Albums of the Year list. And yeah, a new decade is beckoning because this time it's 2010. And you know what? We're going to be kicking off with a banger because 2010 is a pretty good year. So without further ado, let's be complete rankers and rank up a storm. These are my personal top 10 albums of 2010. So we're going to be kicking off this list with Senior, which was the fourth album by Röyksopp. If you want to know the ins and outs of this record, please check out my full Röyksopp ranking list. I will link it at the end of this video, but the broad strokes are that this is an entirely instrumental electronica/chill-out album with some impressive variety in its soundscapes. But I wanted to spend this entry's time to go into anecdote mode. You see, I've always thought this record to be the least of Röyksopp's work, even though I still like it. Originally, I didn't have this included on my list. Instead, I had Iron Maiden's The Final Frontier in at number 10. But then, something happened, and I had to change my list, even scrapping a whole bunch of already completed editing to squeeze this on. It was after a recording session I had recently with my band. We were all exhausted back at my bandmate's apartment, coming down and drinking beer. So, I stuck this on for its relaxing vibe. And there I was, in the low light, my bandmate sleeping all around me, a beautiful Japanese girl's head in my lap, sipping imported beer at 2 a.m. in the morning, listening to this record. Alone, but resolutely not alone. And on that night, in that moment, this was a 5-star record. In the cold light of day, this isn't a 5-star record, it's a 4-star record, but my relationship with this album will never be the same again because we'll always have that moment together. So here's a raised glass to those seminal listens that occasionally come along to completely change your opinion on certain albums that you might have dismissed. They are truly beautiful things. Coming in next, we have The Winter of Mixed Drinks by Frightened Rabbit, which was the band's third LP and follow-up to their breakout classic The Midnight Organ Fight. On this LP, the band are dialing back the jangle pop in favour of cathartic shoegaze soundscapes. Cue lots of reverb, walls of distortion and atmospheric interludes, all that good shoegaze stuff. It's pretty obvious to say that this is an atmospheric and cohesive record as, what's the point of doing shoegaze if you don't have that stuff nailed down? The record is consistent and there are plenty of highlights too, some of which include the lapping sadness of The Loneliness and the Scream, the epic sing-along nature of Skip the Youth, the rhythmic guitars of Not Miserable, and the rocking Idlewild-esque single Living in Colour. Sadly, this album is seen as a bit of an ugly duckling when compared to the record that came before it, and yeah, although it's not quite as seminal as that album, I still appreciate where this LP is coming from and consider it to be a damn good addition to the band's discography. Next up, we have Teen Dream, which was the third album by Beach House, and this album wins the award for Typical Indie Album of the Year. You know the criteria for typical indie album: clean arpeggiated guitars smothered with reverb, lots of jangle and folk pop leanings, and heavy-hearted lyrics with cathartic edges married to catchy vocal hooks. Typical indie. At this point in history, there are like a million of these records released every year, and I could pad out the entire list with them, as most of them are at least, halfway good. I mean, this year you also have the likes of Sea Bear and Deer Hunter with excellent examples of the genre, but the best of the bunch for me is this album right here by Beach House. All the usual typical indie trappings that I've already mentioned are firmly in place, augmented by Victoria Legrand's androgynous vocals, which goes against the usual way that we use that term. Usually it's men that sound like women. This time it's a woman that sounds like a man, which is, kind of cool. Tracks like Silver Soul, Walk in the Park, and Used to Be deliver exactly what you signed up for with this type of music, whilst the obfuscating melodies of Better Times and the constantly building 10 Mile Stereo seek to subvert your expectations by going bigger than usual. So yeah, if you're hankering after that typical indie sound, this is 2010's pick of the bunch. Next up, we have the self-titled 4th LP from Interpol. And this album tends to get a rough ride from the critics, but I just don't know why, as I love all the choices the band is making on this LP. Here, they're moving away from the more epic mainstream pop of their previous album, Our Love to Admire, into darker, more art rock territory. I really love Daniel Kessler's guitar work on this record. He shifted into a new guitar style of rhythmically repeating the same riff, which brings a really cool vibe to the tracks. For me, this is close to recapturing that sleazy sexual energy of their debut. It just crackles with underground danger and electricity. Consistent from start to finish, there are no weak tracks here, and highlights include the scene-setting opening duo of Success and Memory Serves, the building understated classic lights, the hook-ready barricade, and the darkness-inviting closing duo, All of the Ways and The Undoing, especially All of the Ways with its guitars that just sound like crashing waves from the sea. So yeah, this record is very underrated and unfairly dismissed in the Interpol conversation, and for me, it's a very easy placing on this list. Coming in next, we have Right About Love by Belle and Sebastian. On this record, the band are adding much more keyboard and synth textures than ever before. That doesn't really affect the overall sound much though, as this is pretty much business as usual for Belle and Sebastian. Cue lots of upbeat pop with beautiful melodies and twee overtones, and at this point in their career, they've just hit a general consistent quality. If you like Belle and Sebastian, you're gonna like this. If you've never liked the band, then this is unlikely to change your mind. But highlights for me on this include the subtle dance flavours of opener I Didn't See It Coming, the super catchy I Want the World to Stop, the folky Norah Jones duet, Little Lou, Ugly Jack, Prophet John, and the extremely upbeat duo of Right About Love and I'm Not Living in the Real World. My favourite off of this though is probably the beautiful autopilot glide of the Ghost of Rock School. So yeah, this is just Belle and Sebastian doing what Belle and Sebastian does best, just another great record from them. So we're going to be kicking off the top 5 with The Waves, which was the debut album by Tamarin. And this record is arguably my favourite shoegaze album of all time, which I know is a fairly controversial statement, but yeah, even with the likes of Ride, The Jesus and Mary Chain, My Bloody Valentine and Slowdive out there, I'd still plump for this as my favourite. All the usual shoegaze elements are in place, tons of reverb, distorted echoey guitars, vocals that are buried deep in the mix which makes the lyrics kinda hard to decipher. However, what sets this one apart is its gothic post-punk edge and the driving bass and beautiful timbre of Tamarin's voice. It's a hypnotic mix of elements that leads to a super atmospheric and cohesive record, full of resigned sadness and towering, icy soundscapes. At 9 songs and 37 minutes, it's also the perfect length and has no weak tracks on it. Highlights include the squalling opening title track, the frigidly beautiful choirs of Winter, the more rocking single Love Fade, and the weeping melodies of Haze Interior. My favourite off of this though is the barnstorming closer Mild Confusion, which owes more than a slight nod to Joy Division. So yeah, The Waves by Tamarin might not be as famous as the likes of Loveless, Psycho Candy or Soulvlaki, but it's just as good and well worth your time. Next up, we have Bang Goes the Knighthood by the Divine Comedy. During the previous decade, the band had been bubbling under a bit. I mean, I liked 2001's Regeneration and 2004's Absent Friends, but both missed my list. Unfortunately, 2006's Victory for the Comic Muse was a bit of a bust, and to be honest, I thought that the Divine Comedy's best days were far behind them. And then this album came out, and immediately dispensed with that kind of thinking, because this album is just an insane return to form for the band. It's just an out of the blue Hail Mary of an album that sits amongst their very best work. On this record, Neil Hannon is stripping away the usual orchestral bombast for a more acoustic and piano-led set, which really thrusts his lyrics into the spotlight. Thankfully, he's on absolute fire here, turning in probably his best set of lyrics ever, certainly his funniest. This album definitely highlights the comedy in the Divine Comedy, and yeah, I know that the band's name comes from the incredibly dark work by Dante, so you can put your knives away, fellow Divine Comedy fans, but yeah, this is easily the most comedic clutch of songs in the band's discography. The LP is incredibly consistent, not a weak track in sight. Highlights include the satirical stomp of The Complete Banker, the slice of heavenly jangle pop that is Neapolitan Girl, the super catchy nature of At the Indie Disco and I Like, and the lyrically intricate Assume the Perpendicular. I mean, that lyric, Ben's impressed by the buttresses thrust up the chapel nave. What a fucking lyric. So yeah, this album represents a stunning return to form and set in motion the next phase of the band's career, where Neil Hannon passed over into true elder statesman / national treasure status. Awesome stuff. Coming in third place and taking home the bronze medal, we have High Violet by The National, which was the band's fifth album and also their commercial breakthrough. And The National are just one of the most acclaimed post-punk and art rock bands out there. But for me, it's a weird one. I mean, this album, High Violet, I absolutely love, yet it's the only record of theirs that I love. I've never been able to get into the band's other work. Despite rampant acclaim, earlier records like Alligator or Boxer have a slightly undercooked feel for me, especially when compared to this album, and records that followed seemed like repetitions of this LP, just at a lower quality. So overall, The National might seem like a bit of a bust for me, but I fucking adore this record. I love every single song on it, and it easily breaches the 5-star mark for me, which makes my apathy towards the other records even more baffling. Lyricist and singer Matt Berenger definitely has a way with attention-grabbing couplets, and every track has memorable lines that just burn into your synapses. Terrible Love has its trembling chorus of "It takes an ocean not to break." Anyone's Ghost is stuffed full of awesome lyrics such as "I had a hole in the middle where the lightning went through. I told my friends not to worry." My favourite though has to be the chorus of album highlight Conversation 16. "I was afraid I'd eat your brains because I'm evil." That's just so badass, and the way it's delivered, fantastic. Add into that some astonishing consistency that takes in the mournful jangle of Sorrow, the Morrissey-esque England, and the stomping Blood Buzz Ohio, again with the unforgettable lyric, "I was carried to Ohio in a swarm of bees. I never married, but Ohio don't remember me." Mwah! Chef's kiss for the lyrics on this record. They are awesome, and so is the album, and it's a very easy placing on this list. Silver medal time, and the silver medal is going to go to the Arcade Fire's masterpiece third album, The Suburbs. For me, this is easily the band's best LP and an easy 5 stars. How this isn't a number 1 is frankly insane, and it would have been number 1 if it didn't clash with one of my perennial top 10 albums of all time. As I said in the intro, 2010 is a damn good year. On this album, the band are throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's 16 tracks and 1 hour and 4 minutes long. Usually I'd say that's too long, not in this case though, as the album doesn't drag, not one bit. Every track earns its place, and the longer it goes, the more atmosphere it gathers. The variety of soundscapes also helps it, and it really reminds me of The Cure's Kiss Me Kiss Me Kiss Me in terms of variety and consistency. That said, this album is definitely more controlled than that one, as there is a deliberate pacing and thoughtful sequencing here. As for highlights, well, the overall atmosphere is the ultimate highlight, as this is an album where the whole is better than the sum of its parts. Again, much like Kiss Me Kiss Me Kiss Me, but individual high spots include the opening single The Suburbs, with its odd melodies and upbeat piano, the Smith-esque guitar of Modern Man, the awesome build-up of Rococo, the orchestral moments on Half-Light 1, the surprising rhythmic burst at the end of Suburban War, and the communal sing-along nature of We Used to Wait. The best moment, however, comes with the penultimate closes, Sprawl 1 Flatland and Sprawl 2 Mountains Beyond Mountains. Sprawl 1 is a low, maudlin piece of atmosphere, while Sprawl 2 explodes into a euphoric slice of 80s synth pop. It is glorious. So yeah, this is a stamped and dated masterpiece of 2010. If you haven't heard it, you need to just drop what you're doing, set off the fire alarms, beast your neighbour's dog with a newspaper, and just go listen to it. So here we are at the top of the mountain, and the gold medal for 2010 is going to go to He Who Saw the Deep, which was the sophomore effort from I Like Trains. And on this album, the band are ditching the gothic soundscapes of their debut as well as the historical concept in favour of a much cleaner indie jangle vibe with post-punk overtones and a vastly more engaging emotional core. I won't beat around the bush on this one. I fucking love this record with every fibre of my being, and at one point in my life this held the position as my favourite album of all time. And hey, fans of the 90s Britpop bands Gene and the Divine Comedy, listen up, because this album is the hidden gem that you've been looking for. It captures those bands' deep emotional gravitas, and Dave Martin's voice slides pleasingly close to both Martin Rossiter's and Neil Hannon's with its baritone timbre. The album is epic, ambitious and atmospheric, and it has a loose concept theme where every track seems to be tied to the sea. And it just feels like sinking into a raging, violent sea, but once below the waves, everything is calm and serene, and you're left resigned to your fate of just rolling sadness and the eventual gasp of catharsis as you resurface at the end of the record. It's a real roller coaster of an emotional ride. Interestingly, this album does a lot with minimalism. Some tracks like Hope Is Not Enough or Broken Bones are so quiet that you just kind of want to lean into the track to find out the details. And those moments are absolutely phenomenal. I mean, try not to get chills all through your body during Broken Bones as Dave Martin whispers, "We turn to face the cold embrace of some forgotten sea," as distorted drums creep up behind him like a huge black tidal wave. Mwah! Chef's kiss, it is awesome. Progress is a Snake starts low but builds up into a thunderous rhythmic maelstrom, with Dave singing about Europe slipping into the sea. These Feet of Clay marries hard driving bass lines with sweeping orchestral swells. Mwah! Chef's kiss again, it's absolutely awesome. But the best moment on this LP comes in the form of the epic Sea of Regrets, which is the band's Olympian for all those Gene fans out there. A building ballad that slowly gathers force and emotion before exploding with a sing-along refrain to die for. And that relaxing nautical themed outro, mwah, chef's kiss again. And yeah, I'm just out of chef's kisses for the next 10 years, but I don't give a fuck because it was worth it. So yeah, underrated, undersold and unknown, this is one of the great masterpieces that slipped by unnoticed. Rectify that, go listen to it, you won't be disappointed. And that's it, that's my 2010 list. But that might not be your list. Please sound off in the comment section and tell me all the classics that I've missed. Like, share, subscribe and all that other kind of YouTube jazz. Take care of yourself and make sure to check back for my 2011 list, but most importantly, just keep on ranking.